CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell joins us now from Jerusalem. The Syrian Democratic Forces are threatening to surrender Syrian President Assad. What would that mean to the region?
Well, Pat, that would turn the region whole upside down. What that would mean is the Assad regime would come in to take over this area, northeast Syria. The Russians would come in. Worst of all, Pat, it would look like the Iranians would come in as well. This would also quench what has become a really democratic, representative form of government there in the region. And I think part of what we're seeing right now is President Erdogan is being about a bully. He's actually threatened the European Union. He's going to release 3.6 million refugees to Europe. And I've talked to one Syrian official who said, you know, what comes next? Could he go after the Kurdish regional government there in northern Iraq? So it's a very dire situation, as you mentioned, Pat, about this no-fly zone. That is critical, from what I understand, to stem the tide of this Turkish invasion. That's what people are looking for as just the first step to reverse what's happening right now.
The Kurds were our loyal allies. The Peshmerga were with us from the very day we moved into Iraq. And have we abandoned them? Is that what you read?
That's exactly what seems to be happening. That's exactly, Pat, what we were hearing several months ago when President Trump first made his decision to pull U.S. troops. Don't abandon us. And this has happened historically. You know, there's a proverb from the Kurds that say, we have no friends except the mountains. That's because they've been betrayed over and over, unfortunately and tragically, many times by the United States. This seems to be one of the worst betrayals right now. I have heard anecdotally that some of the U.S. troops that are in there, that it's gut-wrenching for them. They're standing by while seeing the allies that they've worked with for several years fighting the battle against ISIS being slaughtered and having attacked a NATO army against what is basically a very vibrant militia, but nothing to be able to stand against a NATO army with air power, with tanks, with the kind of forces they have. So yes, Pat, it looks like that right now, so far, that the U.S. has abandoned, turned its back on the Kurdish people.
Well, there are at least 100,000 Christians. What's going to happen to them?
Well, they're in peril, as we saw. You know, we talked to this pastor, Zani Bakr from Kobani. We broke bread with him not too long ago, Pat, earlier in this year. And right now we're hearing that at 4 p.m. local time, Kobani, where we talked to him last night, will be under attack. So they are under a threat. You know, this security zone that Erdogan talks about, he calls it a terror zone. That's where most of the Christians live, about 100,000 of them on the Turkish-Syrian border. And as they talked to us months ago, they're terrified. We could hear that on the phone last night. His wife, Chinar, the pastor, his wife and baby had to flee. And Pat, one historical context here, many of the people that fled the Armenian genocide about 100 years ago fled to this portion of Syria. So these are many of the grandchildren, great-grandchildren of people who fled the Ottoman Empire's Armenian genocide. Now they feel like they're in the thumb of this neo-Ottoman Empire, President Erdogan, who's trying to attack these people and ethnically cleanse them once again from this region.
Chris, what were they saying in the mosques? That Muhammad is back. Would you tell us what they're preaching to these troops as they go into this battle?
Pat, that's such an important point to make right now. This is not just sort of a campaign against what they call terrorists. This is in many ways a jihad. The director of the Turkish Religious Affairs is asking today in the mosques of Turkey, about 84,000 of them, to pray from Surah number 8 in the Quran, conquest prayers. And as we've reported before, there's a pro-Erdogan newspaper that said to go tell the unbelievers that the army of Muhammad is coming. They see this as a jihad. This is not just a campaign to take away a terrorist haven, as it were. This is a jihad against the unbelievers, including the Christians, Yazidis, and the Kurds. And so that's what we're witnessing right now.
The Iranians want a clear path all the way to the Mediterranean. Is this going to give them what they're looking for?
Very much so. In fact, if the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, do surrender to the Assad regime, that opens the door, worst of all, to the Iranians. It would help them build their bridge all the way from Tehran to the Mediterranean. It would put them much closer here to Israel. And Israel is taking note of this as well. And they're thinking, well, if the United States won't back their main ally, the Kurds, and also remember, Pat, on September 14th, there was an attack against Saudi Arabia with no military response by either Saudi Arabia or the U.S. They're seeing this as the United States being weak in the region. When people are weak in the Middle East, the other strong people take advantage of that. That's what President Erdogan is doing right now. And that's why Israel is paying attention to what's happening and why it's so critical to be praying for what's happening in this region.
Chris, fabulous. Please keep coming back. I love your reports. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a tragedy that's taking place before our eyes. You know, the United States is not a reliable ally any longer for anybody. And that's a terrible thing to have said about your nation.